Okay, welcome back. Plenty to get through. Next up, it is talking points, and I'm going to be a stickler for the time. Well, we've done this one, top weights. we've done it with the last couple of days that we looked at, but what do you want to add about this? I tell you what,
God knows. I feel like you're having a dig at me there with the stickler on the time business.
No, what it is because we're a little bit behind as the programme goes, so we're going to be a stickler on the time. Nothing personal on you.
One.
But would you like to see more graded handicaps? Would you like to see the Desert Orchid race?
Yeah, that was what immediately what I was going to say was Desert Orchid. When I was a young fella, a long time ago, it felt like you saw a lot more kind of Borough Hill Lad, Desert Orchid, horses giving away chunks of weight, those quality handicap chasers. And probably in recent years, there's been less of that, and they tend to pot hunt round at odds on in graded races in the run up to the festival, and maybe that's part of the reason why people talk about the jump season, being all about the festival. And if you had some nice handicap performances in the pre-Christmas period, that would be better, wouldn't it? I mean, that was great, Grenadine and Frodon, that was brilliant.
I suppose the thing is, you're not going to change the programme, but as it is now, and also when you have horses like the aforementioned two doing what they do, you also keep a lot of horses out the handicap. So it doesn't always mean you're going to get a big field.
Yeah, and there must have been a reason for it. So growing up, I remember Desert Orchid and Dad getting beat by him on many occasions. But back then, you didn't have the Betfair Chase, and the options were narrowed down. So if you won the Sun Alliance or the Gold Cup, you meet each other in the Hennessy, and then you'd work your way sort of to the Gold Cup back from then. So I think there are probably more options to keep everybody apart. And also, a lot of those Desert Orchid races, there are only 3 or 4 runners.
That's true. That is true. Yeah.
Okay, that's us done on that. You mentioned the Betfair Chase. There's a perfect link into our next talking point. Now, this 7 runners last year. I don't know how many entries there were. There are only 6 entries this year. Something I spoke to Paul Nicholls about earlier on in the week. It could be a number of factors. I guess the obvious one is we don't have the horses.
Yeah, and that is the obvious. You're looking at it and you're thinking, which are the horses that are missing? I suppose you could say L'Homme Pressé, but they talked about him going to Ascot instead. Look, if those 6 turn up, it's going to be a very good race. But it's a race that's never had a big field. I think probably the biggest fields that had it was when Kingscliff was winning it at the beginning of the sort of 2000s when it first started. But the times I've ridden it, I can't remember there being more than 5 or 6 runners. But when those 5 or 6 turn up, it's always a good race.
I did see a tweet this week about the number of chasers rated 151 plus over the last, I think it was 8 years or something, and it was the lowest number this year.
Is that because of the British handicap are just tightening things up a bit with regards to the trying to make the Brits more competitive in handicaps at the festival?
That's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that. I mean, it could be the economic situation might be a small factor. I mean, obviously prize money is always a factor in these things.
Maybe horses in
and Ireland is a factor.
Well, thank goodness we've got a horse like Aplutar coming over. In some ways, makes the race all the more exciting. You don't think if it's not a case, surely, that if last year's winner, the Gold Cup winner, wasn't in there, we'd have more runners? Do you think? Or do you think he is scaring some off?
No, I don't think he's scaring any off. It's just, you get to the top level, it's so competitive. There's only so many top-level horses about. Sometimes there's more than others. You talk about the great days of, Monksfield, Sea Pigeon, the golden era of hurdlers, and then the Brave Inca golden era of hurdles. They go in cycles sometimes, and at the moment, perhaps the very best are just a different league to the ones below them, and there's a much bigger gap than there have been in years gone by.
And yet the champion hurdle division looks an absolute stunner this year, so maybe that's just where we are at the moment. The hurdle division and the 2-mile hurdle division looks incredibly strong. Staying chases in the UK, perhaps not quite there at the moment. Frankie in the USA, Frankie goes to Hollywood, whatever you want to call it. This is exciting, but I wonder if it poses questions for 2023 and Clarehaven as well, because the fact remains that if Frankie Dettori does pick up a Triple Crown ride, which I know is the aim, we know is the aim, then John Gosden does probably have an interesting decision to make.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, isn't it? I suppose, I don't know, I kind of didn't enjoy all that stuff last year as much as some people seem to. It was almost like, you know, Frankie was getting a bit of a rollicking in front of the world.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and he's a 50-year-old man who's been the top of his sport for many years. He doesn't deserve that, does he? I thought it was a bit. But John Gosden would say, oh well, yeah, but he needed that. That was the kick up the bum that really got him to, you know, pull himself together and get. He needed to be riding more often in order to keep at the top and all that kind of stuff. I didn't enjoy that much. I don't know Frankie really, but I have met him a couple of times, and I did have a conversation with him about quitting, which is not an original thing to talk to him about. And I said I thought it'd be really good if he did the kind of McCoy thing of riding all around the country and going to every track and doing a kind of lap of honour tour. He didn't fancy that at all.
Really?
I won't name the track, but there was one track. He said, "There's no way I'm ever going back there again." I thought that would be really good. I guess the fact he's going to America, and there was talk of the warm weather being a factor, and his kids being a bit older and not caring about Christmas anymore, means that he's less likely to do that sort of thing if he does retire in the next year or two.
Yeah, I think it's a more appealing proposition going to California, I'd imagine, than touring the UK. Maybe not to you, I don't know. But
I don't know. I just thought it would be quite nice from a racing point of view, you know.
See, I quite enjoyed the drama of the Frankie John Gosden debacle last year and how public it was.
I thought it was a bit unseemly, actually.
Yeah, it was, but that's why I liked it. but equally, you know, it gave us something to talk about as well, didn't it? Okay, safety on national hunt tracks. There's a couple of variants to this. So first of all, the changing the colour of the posts on the fences that's come in to white. I've heard some suggestions that with younger horses seeing it for the first time, they've jammed on a bit because it's new, and when you have a quicker surface that's been watered, that's led to slipping and things like that. Has that been a factor, do you think, or not?
Not personally. I think that obviously there's been a lot of study that's gone in behind it, and they've changed it for those reasons. It's been the case in France for many years. They were white over there. To me, it hasn't made much difference. What causes the slippage is the conditions we have at the moment when it's quick ground and it rains and suddenly gets a bit greasy. So I think I wouldn't call that an issue.
Okay, and do you think have you seen any difference from the white coming in? It's obviously a lot of research went into it. It's part of the 26 changes that came in as part of a Horsewell Live study. And this is all for horse welfare, and it's all trying to help. Has it or not?
Yeah, look, I think it's probably it is too early to say. Only statistics and the reports afterwards will tell. The only thing perhaps have differences. The horses do notice that it's slightly different. If you're riding a horse that's had plenty of runs looking at the orange boards and suddenly seeing the white ones, they will have a look at it first time, but then at the same time it's up to trainers and what have you to put in the facilities at home to make the difference. I think
to get the dewlocks out
basically there's a lot of that going down. Dad put some paint out the other day, but if you've got to take the paint out, you just put tins of paint in front of a ditch, but that's another story altogether.
So far he's taken a laxative and he's forgotten.
I saw that the other day. We were galloping down, I was saying, what are those tins of paint? Oh, I forgot I put them down there, I haven't used it yet. But yeah, so I think that's the only difference, but the majority of places you go in now, they've adapted. Everybody adapts very, very quickly.
Very quickly. If we had a summer again next year like we've just had, do you think there should be more plans in place to use the flat courses at tracks where you can do that, where it's easier ground?
That I do agree with strongly. I think at Newbury the other day, for instance, you walk on the flat track, it was tremendous ground, and on the hurdles track it wasn't so good. It's worked at Chepstow, there's no reason why it couldn't work at Newbury.
Okay. White paint to white paper now. Neil, you have news for us.
So gambling white paper, if you'll remember, Chris Philp was the minister under Boris Johnson. He'd pretty much written the white paper and it was due to come out, and because of the troubles that Johnson was having towards the end, they didn't really get much work done in the last few weeks. basically the civil servants have really not put a pen to paper. I guess if you're a civil servant that's worked on it, there's not much point amending it or changing it now, because they keep changing the minister and you don't really know what's going to happen, and the Prime Minister's changed twice. The word on the street is now that the white paper is just going to come out as it is, as it was written under Chris Philp, and it'll come out probably before Christmas, which means affordability checks if you deposit more than 600 in 2 months. That was what was briefed to the media, and that's what we understand is going to be in the white paper. It's going to mean IBAS becoming the ombudsman, a whole bunch of other changes that were briefed to the media, like things like the stake limits on online casino games going down in the way that FOBTs did, that kind of thing. Some changes to advertising, etc. I think, to an extent, the industry, the betting industry, will be pleased because it will give them some certainty. They were getting a bit fed up with the Gambling Commission kind of deciding to sort of make up their own laws on the basis that there wasn't a law, and then not really giving proper guidance to the companies on how this should be enforced or what exactly they should do. And it gives the industry a bit more certainty. What won't happen, though, I understand, is, this is what people are saying, I heard this via somebody in the Tory party, quite senior MP. They said that, well, there's no chance of them passing much legislation before the next general election. They're going to try and pass as little legislation as possible. So this white paper will be out there. Sorry, I know I've gone over the time. Right. This white paper will be out there, but it won't become law, probably. If the DCMS, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, want to get any legislation through before the next general election, that'll be the Online Harms Bill. It won't be the Gambling Act. So basically, it'll be the Tory party will have said, look, we've done something about gambling, but they actually won't pass a law. They'll just make a declaration
leading up
of
to an
what
election,
they plan to do.
Will it become part of a sort of a political debate then?
Well, yeah, it could.
Could Labour say, well,
it definitely could, because it puts the ball slightly into Labour's court, because now they have to either say, we quite like the look of this white paper, it's pretty much what we were pressing the government to do, or they have to say, oh no, it doesn't go far enough, which is possibly slightly more where Labour are.
But that's where it becomes, I think, a problem for the industry, because that
does become a problem then for the horse racing industry, because if the affordability is even more draconian, well then the revenue to racing really suffers.
Okay, we both got a yellow card there.
Sorry about that.
That's all right, it's allowed. Welfare reporting. So this is off the back of last night. There were 2 injuries sustained to horses at the Breeders' Cup. Domestic spending off the back of a big old absence, and Epicenter. There was positive news actually this morning on Epicenter. Hopefully that injury he sustained can be fixed, so fingers crossed, unless I've missed something out there now. The thing that struck me in the main was the contrast with the reporting from the Breeders' Cup to what I think we've become accustomed to over here. Now, I'm talking mainly about jumps racing over here, and I know that is a very different beast altogether. By and large, horses are obviously more likely to sustain certain injuries, to have falls, etc. There's therefore more reporting to be done. But I thought in particular to our Grand National reporting, where Racing TV, ITV and BBC 5 Live all came off air with a report that all horses were back in the stables and there were no fatalities, largely a positive report, which then obviously we lost 2 horses subsequent to that. Over here, you had in America, you had a vet on immediately within 5 minutes of the race. Within 5 minutes of the very best racehorse in the world, demolishing them, one of the best dirt performances of all time, we were interviewing a vet about Epicenter. Now, that might not be everyone's cup of tea, but when horse welfare is under the microscope, I thought that was hugely positive, because the way that you tell the public, Tom, as far as I'm concerned, that you are nothing but committed to horse welfare is by being completely open and honest about every single incident. That's what struck me. I feel that over here we're a little bit fearful of that reporting initially, and I was struck by the openness of the Americans. They definitely learned, for example, from 2019 when Santa Anita had all the problems and they lost a horse in the 2019 Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, but again, I think there's, I'm repeating myself, that a balance too. First of all, the vets involved, if something happens on the racecourse, their first priority is to get the horse correct first,
yes.
Right? And before filling everybody on what's going on. Secondly, as well, that after the race, sometimes injuries don't manifest themselves straight away. Sometimes, same as anything, you see somebody on a football pitch, it can look a lot worse than it actually is, and vice versa. So the most important thing is to get the prognosis right first. As I say, it's all very well coming on saying this has happened or that has happened. If you get it wrong, as I say, there's many different caveats to it, and you want to be as open and as honest as possible, and of course, when these things happen, we've got to show the treatment of care and everything that goes with it. But first and foremost, what's most important is that we get it right, and the horse receives the treatment that they all deserve. And as I say, I think that's the most important bit. Is getting that bit right, and then the rest follows. As I say, last night was interesting seeing how they dealt with it in the US, but I still feel over here generally we get it right, and we just got to continue down that path.
Do you think there is an element that we're a bit squeamish about mentioning it though?
Look, there is that possibility, but at the same time, I think you look at what happened last year at Aintree. The most important thing is we get these things right, because if we jump the gun too soon about one thing or another, you get to made to look a little bit silly.
And I absolutely take the point that a 40-runner Grand National is very different to flat racing over in America, or indeed over here, as are injuries at the Cheltenham Festival. I suppose what I'm getting at is on the biggest stage of all, when we're trying to sell our sport to the wider public, I guess it's the appearance of a willingness to discuss it as soon as possible. I think that's the best way to serve the sport.
Yeah, no, that's it certainly has its merits, but as I say, we've got to get those. If you're clear and you know what's happened, that's the first thing. And say sometimes, 5 minutes after the race, the diagnosis can be very different from what you originally thought.
Okay, that's the second yellow for me. I'm off. You're on a first yellow. Strategic review. This was something. In fact, we've touched on it already. But what do you want to say here, Neil?
Oh, well, it's just because I think some people sort of feel like not much has happened on it, and I think they had those two meetings. What was it about? I don't know, 7 or 8 weeks ago, where the BHA got 19 people into a room with all the various representatives of different bodies. And I think that, from what I've heard, that positive stuff is coming from it. I think there's a meeting in about a week's time where the Racecourse Association have to agree the governance. So basically that could mean an end to the whole tripartite agreement and the whole idea of veto, which in a way will take away the power of the racecourses to control the fixtures to an extent. And I don't know exactly whether that will totally do that, but it certainly is a giving up of power. And the main criticism that you can have of the BHA, I think, is that they're a governing body that doesn't have the authority to deal with the sport, because they don't control all elements of the sport. They don't control the fixture list. That's the main problem that racing has, I think. And if the Racecourse Association, I think the meeting's in about a week's time or something, come out and say that they're happy with the strategic review and the way of going forward, it gives the BHA the opportunity to make future changes to the fixture list, which has got to be good for everybody, and not just in terms of like culling 200 races or 300 races, or arguing about whether it's 300 or 400. In all kinds of ways, in terms of, why do we not have Sunday night racing ever? Why is Sunday always a bit rubbish compared with Saturday, when these are the 2 days of the week when most people can go racing? These kind of questions, the BHA have not been able to do much about those things because they don't control the fixture list.
Okay, we got there. That is it for this week's Talking Points.